In 1874, a check for $5,000 was cashed at the First National Bank of Bozeman. The memo line simply read, "Payment for services rendered." But everyone in the territory knew what that money was really for. It was the price of a human life. Silas Blackwood, the richest and most hated man in Montana, hadn't just bought a horse or a herd of cattle. He had bought a wife that nobody else wanted. But the history books leave out the most important part. They leave out the moment the parlor doors closed, the moment she lifted her veil, and the moment the devil of Montana froze in his tracks. Because what Silas Blackwood saw that night wasn't just a face. It was a ghost he thought he had buried 10 years ago. This is the real story of the bride who broke the beast. The floorboards of the Gilded Spur Saloon were sticky with spilled ale and tobacco spit, but on this particular Tuesday in November 1874, the air smelled mostly of desperation. Miller's Crossing wasn't much of a town. It was a blister on the landscape of the Montana Territory, a place where dreams went to die and where morals were looser than a $2 saddle. In the center of the room, under the yellow haze of a kerosene lamp, stood Clara O'Malley. She was 22 years old, though the harsh prairie wind had already etched fine lines around her eyes that made her look 30. She wore a dress made of gray homespun wool that had been patched so many times it was more thread than fabric. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped in front of her to hide the tremors in her fingers. "Look at her," bellowed Tobias, Red O'Malley, a man whose face was a road map of broken capillaries and bad decisions. He gripped Clara's shoulder with a hand that looked like a bear claw. Strong back, good teeth. She cooks, she cleans, and she don't talk back unless you tell her to. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd of miners and drifters. They weren't looking at her strong back. They were looking at the limp. Clara's left leg was twisted, the result of a wagon accident when she was 12 that had never been set right by a doctor. In the ruthless economy of the West, a lame horse was shot, and a lame woman was invisible. "Come on, Tobias," heckled a miner from the back, a man known as Dusty Jim. "She walks like a crab on a hot rock. I wouldn't pay 2 bits for her." Clara flinched, but she didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears in front of men like her uncle Tobias only made them cruel. Tobias had lost the deed to their small homestead in a poker game 3 nights ago. Selling Clara's hand in marriage was his last chip. He called it a dowry arrangement. The law called it a gray area. Clara called it slavery. $5, Tobias shouted, panic creeping into his voice. $5 covers the debt I owe to the livery stable. Just $5 and she's yours. The silence stretched, heavy and humiliating. A drunk at the bar coughed. The piano player idly hit a low, dissonant key. Clara closed her eyes. "Let me disappear," she prayed. "Let the floor open up and swallow me whole." She was unwanted, unsellable, a burden to the only blood relative she had left. Then, the bat-wing doors of the saloon swung open with a violent creak. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The laughter died instantly. Even the bartender stopped wiping a glass. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He was tall, wearing a long black duster coat that was coated in the pale dust of the high plains. He wasn't Silas Blackwood. Everyone knew Blackwood never left his mountain stronghold. But this man wore the Blackwood brand on his saddlebags. It was Jeremiah Pike, the foreman of the Ironwood Ranch. Pike walked to the center of the room, his spurs jingling with a menacing rhythm. Ching, ching, ching. He stopped 3 feet from Tobias and the trembling Clara. Pike didn't look at Clara. He looked at Tobias with eyes like cold flint. "Mr. Blackwood hears you have a problem," Pike said. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. Tobias swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I'm just trying to find a good home for my niece, Mr. Pike. She's a good girl, just a bit damaged." "Mr. Blackwood is in need of a wife," Pike stated flatly. "He requires someone who understands hardship, someone who isn't afraid of the dark, and he requires her immediately." "Well," Tobias stammered, a greedy light igniting in his eyes, "there are other girls, prettier ones, at the brothel down in Deadwood. You could—" "He doesn't want a whore," Pike interrupted. "He wants a wife, and he wants this one." Pike reached into his coat and withdrew a heavy leather pouch. He dropped it onto the poker table next to Tobias. The sound it made wasn't the clink of coins. It was the heavy, dull thud of solid gold bars. $500, Pike said. The room gasped. $500 could buy a farm, a herd, and a new life. It was an obscene amount of money for a woman the town drunk wouldn't take for $5. "Done!" Tobias shrieked, snatching the bag before Pike could change his mind. "Take her. She's yours." Pike finally turned his gaze to Clara. For a second, something flickered in the foreman's eyes. Was it pity, or was it a warning? "Get your things, Miss O'Malley," Pike said. "We ride for Ironwood tonight." Clara looked at her uncle, who was already tearing open the bag of gold, completely forgetting her existence. She looked at the crowd, who stared at her now, not with mockery, but with a terrified awe. She had just been bought by the monster of Montana. She realized then that being unwanted might have been a blessing. Being wanted by Silas Blackwood was a death sentence. The journey to the Ironwood Ranch took 2 days, riding through terrain that God seemed to have made in anger. They climbed out of the valley, up through the jagged passes of the Bridger Mountains, where the wind howled like a banshee and the pine trees grew crooked and sparse. Clara rode on a mare Pike had brought for her. It was a gentle animal, which she was grateful for, as her bad leg ached with every mile. For the first 6 hours, neither of them spoke. Pike rode ahead, a shotgun resting across his saddle horn, his eyes scanning the ridgelines for bandits or Sioux raiding parties. By nightfall of the first day, they made camp under a rocky overhang. Pike started a small fire and handed Clara a strip of jerky and a tin cup of coffee that was strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe. "Why me?" Clara asked. Her voice was raspy from the dust. Pike looked at her across the flames. The firelight danced on his weathered face, deepening the scars on his cheek. "Why you what, miss? Why did he pay that much? Why did he want me?" She gestured to her leg. "I'm a cripple. I have no name, no money. There are daughters of cattle barons in Helena who would kill to marry into the Blackwood money." Pike took a long sip of his coffee. "Those cattle baron daughters want the money, Miss O'Malley. They don't want the man. And they certainly don't want the life." "And what life is that?" "A quiet one," Pike said evasively. "A lonely one." "They say he killed his first wife," Clara whispered. It was a rumor that had circulated for a decade. Silas Blackwood had been married once, before the Civil War. The mansion had burned down one night. His wife's body was never found, but Silas had emerged from the flames burned, broken, and terrifyingly cold. Pike's eyes narrowed. "Folks say a lot of things. Most of them are lies spoken by men who are jealous they can't hold a candle to him. He leaned forward. But I'll tell you this. Silas ain't a monster, but he ain't a man you cross either. He's particular. He needs things a certain way. He hates noise. He hates surprises. And he hates liars. Clara unconsciously touched the bodice of her dress, where a small, folded piece of paper was hidden against her skin. A secret. "I'm no liar, Mr. Pike," she said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Good," Pike grunted, kicking dirt over the fire, "because where we're going, the truth is the only thing that survives." As they rode the next day, the landscape changed. They entered the high valley that belonged entirely to Blackwood. It was beautiful, but imposing. The grass was waist-high and golden, but the mountains surrounding it were jagged black teeth that blocked out the late afternoon sun. And there, sitting on a rise overlooking a roaring river, was the house. It wasn't a ranch house. It was a fortress. Built of dark timber and stone, it loomed against the sky, 3 stories tall with a wraparound porch that looked like it hadn't seen a visitor in years. Smoke curled from a single chimney. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Pike said, using her new title for the first time. It made Clara's blood run cold. As they approached the main gate, Clara saw men working the corrals. They stopped their work to watch her pass. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They took off their hats in a gesture that felt more like a funeral salute than a greeting. Pike helped her down from the horse in front of the massive oak double doors. "He's inside," Pike said. "The library. First door on the right. Go on." "You're not coming in?" Clara asked, panic rising in her throat. "He bought a wife, Clara, not a chaperone. You're on your own now." Pike tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode toward the bunkhouse, leaving Clara standing alone on the porch of the beast's lair. The wind whistled through the eaves. She smoothed her tattered gray dress, took a deep breath, and pushed the heavy doors open. The interior of the house was vast and swallowed in shadow. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight against the day, leaving the hallway illuminated only by the dying light of the fire in the library. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and a faint, sweet scent of pipe tobacco. It was silent, oppressively silent. Clara's limp was more pronounced on the hardwood floor. Thump slide, thump slide. The sound echoed, announcing her arrival like a drumbeat. She reached the library door and hesitated. She thought of her Uncle Tobias, drinking away her price at the saloon. She thought of the poverty she had escaped. "I can do this," she told herself. "I have survived starvation, winter, and the backhand of a drunkard. I can survive a rich man." She stepped into the room. The library was magnificent, lined floor to ceiling with books. In the center of the room, facing the fireplace with his back to her, sat a man in a high-backed leather chair. "You're late," the voice said. It was a baritone rumble, like stones grinding together deep underground. "The pass was snowed in, sir," Clara managed to say. Her voice shook. The chair did not turn. "Pike paid the money?" "Yes, sir." "And you understand the arrangement? You are to run this house. You are to stay out of the West Wing. And you are to leave me alone unless the house is burning down. Is that clear?" Clara bristled. She had expected cruelty, but she hadn't expected to be treated like a piece of furniture. A spark of the fiery Irish temper she had inherited from her mother flared up. "I understand, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp strength. "But in my family, we look a person in the eye when we make a deal." The silence that followed was heavy. The fire popped. Slowly, very slowly, the leather chair creaked. Silas Blackwood stood up. He was giant. He towered over 6'4", with shoulders that spanned the width of the mantel. He wore a fine black suit that looked out of place on a rancher, tailored to perfection. He turned around. Clara gasped. The left side of his face was handsome, almost aristocratically so, with a piercing blue eye and a strong jaw. But the right side was a ruin. Burn scars, shiny and taut, stretched from his temple to his jawline, pulling his mouth into a permanent, slight grimace. He wore an eye patch over his right eye. He was terrifying, and he was looking at her with sheer disdain. "You wanted to look me in the eye?" Silas growled, stepping into the light. "Here, look, is this what you bought with your freedom?" Clara didn't flinch. She had seen miners with limbs blown off by dynamite. She had seen frostbite turn men black. A scar was just a map of pain, and she knew pain. She reached up to the heavy shawl she had wrapped around her head and shoulders to protect against the wind. "I didn't buy anything, Mr. Blackwood," Clara said softly. "You bought me." She pulled the shawl away, letting it drop to the floor. Her hair, a vivid, shocking shade of copper red, tumbled down her back. She lifted her chin, the firelight illuminating her pale face, her green eyes, and the small, star-shaped birthmark just beneath her left collarbone, visible above the neckline of her dress. Silas took one step forward to intimidate her, and then he stopped. His single blue eye went wide. His breath hitched in his chest with a sound like a dying gasp. The color drained from the unscarred side of his face, leaving him ghostly pale. He froze. His hand, which had been reaching for a glass of whiskey on the table, hovered in midair, trembling violently. He stared at her, not at her limp, not at her tattered dress, but at her face. "No," he whispered. The word was barely audible, choked with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Clara frowned, confused. "Mr. Blackwood." Silas stumbled back, hitting the edge of his desk. He looked like a man who had just seen a corpse rise from the grave. He raised a shaking hand and pointed a finger at her. "Who are you?" he roared, his voice cracking. "Who sent you? Is this a game? Is this Thorne's doing?" "I'm Clara. Clara O'Malley. You sent Pike to buy—" "Liar!" Silas slammed his fist onto the desk, overturning the inkwell. Black ink dripped onto the floor like dark blood. "You can't be her. She's dead. I saw her burn." Clara stepped back, terrified now. "I don't know what you're talking about." Silas lunged forward, closing the distance between them. He grabbed her shoulders. His grip was iron, but his hands were shaking. He stared into her eyes, searching for something. His expression, a chaotic war of rage and heartbreak. "Tell me your name," he hissed. "Your real name." "Clara," she cried out. "I swear it." He stared at the star-shaped birthmark on her collarbone. His thumb brushed over it, and he recoiled as if he had been burned. He released her so suddenly she almost fell. He turned his back to her, gripping the mantelpiece, breathing heavily, his head hung low. "Get out," he rasped. "What?" "Get out of my sight," Silas roared, spinning around, his face contorted in agony. "Go to your room, lock the door, and do not come out until I send for you. If I see your face again tonight, I will not be responsible for what I do." Clara didn't wait. She grabbed her skirts and scrambled out of the library, the sound of her uneven gait echoing frantically down the hall. Behind her, she heard the sound of glass shattering against the wall, followed by a howl of anguish that sounded less like a man and more like a wounded animal. Silas Blackwood was alone in the dark again, But he wasn't just angry. He was terrified. Because the woman he had just bought wasn't a stranger. She was the spitting image of the wife he had murdered 10 years ago. Or so the town believed. But Silas knew the truth, and seeing her face just changed everything. The past hadn't just come back to haunt him, it had come back to kill him. For 3 days, Clara O'Malley lived like a prisoner in the gilded cage of Montana. Her room was luxurious, filled with silk sheets and a feather mattress that felt like sleeping on a cloud. But the door was heavy oak, and the silence was deafening. Meals were brought to her by a timid Chinese servant named Chi, who bowed low and refused to make eye contact. "Where is Mr. Blackwood?" Clara would ask every time. "Master is away," Chi would whisper before scurrying off. But Clara knew he wasn't away. At night, when the wind died down, she could hear the heavy, uneven footsteps pacing the floorboards above her. She heard the clink of glass against bottle, the pacing of a man haunting his own house. On the 4th night, a storm rolled in from the Tetons. Thunder shook the foundations of ironwood, and the rain lashed against the glass like gravel. Clara couldn't sleep. The image of Silas's terrified face, the sheer vulnerability in that single blue eye, burned in her mind. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in torment. Restless, she lit a kerosene lamp. She noticed that Chi had forgotten to lock the door from the outside after dinner. Clara's heart raced. Pike had warned her, "Stay out of the West Wing." Silas had warned her, but curiosity is a powerful force, especially when combined with the boredom of captivity. She slipped into the hallway. The house groaned in the wind. The shadows stretched long and thin, dancing like specters on the wallpaper. Clara favored her good leg, moving silently, her hand shielding the flame of her lamp. She passed the library. Empty. She passed the dining hall. Empty. She reached the double doors of the West Wing. They were bound by a heavy iron chain, but the lock was hanging open, as if someone had been in there recently and forgotten to secure it in their haste. Clara pushed the doors open. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and dead flowers. She stepped inside, raising her lamp. It was a ballroom, a grand, dusty ballroom frozen in time. There was a grand piano covered in a white sheet, tables set for a dinner party that never happened, the silverware tarnished black. And at the far end, dominating the room, was a massive oil painting in a gilded frame. Clara limped toward it, the light of her lamp revealing the image inch by inch. First the hem of a blue dress, then delicate hands holding a rose, then the neck, the star-shaped birthmark, and finally, the face. Clara dropped the lamp. The glass chimney shattered, extinguishing the flame and plunging the room into darkness, save for the flashes of lightning outside. She didn't need the light anymore. The image was seared into her retinas. The woman in the painting was her. The same copper hair, the same green eyes, the same nose, the same birthmark. "Eleanor," a voice spoke from the darkness. Clara spun around, backing against the wall. A match flared to life, illuminating the scarred face of Silas Blackwood. He was standing by the piano, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, looking like a demon summoned by the storm. I didn't mean to pry," Clara stammered, her breath coming in short gasps. "Who is she? Why does she have my face?" Silas walked toward her. He moved slowly, heavily. He smelled of rain and bourbon. He stopped inches from her, holding the match up so it illuminated the painting. "She was my wife," Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion, which was more terrifying than anger. Eleanor Vance, the most beautiful woman in the territory. She was kind. She was gentle. She was everything I was not. And the fire? Clara whispered. There was no fire, Silas said, blowing out the match. The room went dark again, lit only by the gray flashes of the storm. That is the lie I tell the town to keep them away. The fire happened, yes, but it didn't kill her. Then what did? Silas grabbed Clara's wrist. His grip was tight, desperate. Greed killed her, Clara. Men with suits and smiles. They wanted the land. They wanted the water rights to the Gallatin River that runs through my property. I refused to sell, so they came for her. He pulled her toward the window. Lightning flashed, illuminating the vast, dark valley below. They took her, Silas rasped, kidnapped her while I was branding cattle in the north pasture. They demanded the deed to Ironwood in exchange for her life. I rode to the meeting place. I brought the deed. I was ready to give it all up. He paused, his body shaking. It was a trap, he whispered. Cornelius Thorne? He took the deed, and then he shot her anyway. Right in front of me. Then they shot me and left me for dead in the burning cabin. I crawled out. I survived. But Eleanor? He turned to Clara, his eye wide and wet. When you walked into that library, I thought I had gone mad. I thought God was punishing me, or giving me a second chance. Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek. I'm not her, Silas. I'm just Clara. My mother was an Irish immigrant who died on a wagon train. I'm nobody. Silas reached out, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was surprisingly tender. You have her eyes. You have her spirit. And you are in terrible danger. Why? Because, Silas said, looking out into the storm, Cornelius Thorne is back in Bozeman. And if he sees you, if he sees Eleanor's ghost walking around Ironwood, he will come to finish what he started 10 years ago. Clara realized then that she wasn't just a bride. She was a target. Why did you buy me then? She asked softly. If I'm a danger to you? Silas looked at her, and for the first time, the hardness in his face melted. Because Pike told me about you. He told me about the girl with the limp who fought off a drunk with a broken bottle at the saloon. He told me you were a fighter. Eleanor was gentle, too gentle for this world. But you... Silas's eyes burned with a strange intensity. You have steel in you, Clara O'Malley. And I need steel, because war is coming. The following week, the atmosphere at Ironwood shifted from a funeral wake to a military encampment. Jeremiah Pike had the ranch hands drilling with Winchester repeaters. Patrols were doubled along the fence line. Silas was no longer the ghost in the attic. He was everywhere, checking fences, cleaning guns, his demeanor cold and focused. Clara was no longer a prisoner. Silas had given her the keys to the house. If we are to die, he had told her over breakfast, you might as well enjoy the china. But Clara wasn't content to arrange flowers. She went to the bunkhouse. She found Pike cleaning a Colt .45. Teach me, she said. Pike looked up, eyebrows raised. Teach you what, ma'am? To shoot. I can't run. She pointed to her leg. So I have to fight. Pike grinned, a slow, crooked smile. Mr. Blackwood won't like it. Mr. Blackwood isn't here, Clara retorted. For 3 days, Pike taught her how to load, aim, and fire a heavy revolver. The recoil bruised her wrist, and the powder burned her nose, but she didn't complain. She turned out to be a natural shot. Steady hands and a patience born of years of being invisible. On the 4th day, a black carriage rolled up to the main gate of Ironwood. It was polished to a mirror shine. pulled by 4 white Arabians. Flanking it were 6 men on horseback, wearing long dusters and carrying shotguns. Pinkerton agents. Hired muscle. Silas stood on the porch, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. Clara stood just behind him, hidden in the shadow of the doorway. The carriage door opened, and a man stepped out. Cornelius Thorne was a small man. He wore a suit of crushed velvet, a silk top hat, and small, round spectacles. He looked like a banker, harmless and soft. But Clara saw the way he moved, like a viper coiling. "Silas, old friend," Thorne called out, spreading his arms. "You haven't aged a day." "Well, except for the—" He gestured vaguely to his own face. "The mishap." "Get off my land, Thorne," Silas said calmly. "You have 10 seconds before my men open fire." Now, Thorne tisked, walking casually toward the porch steps. "Is that any way to greet the new owner of the Ironwood water rights?" "I never signed the deed," Silas said. "You stole it, and a judge in Helena confirmed it was invalid because it was signed under duress." "Judges can be bought, Silas. You know that." Thorne smiled. "But I'm not here for business. I heard a rumor. A delightful, impossible rumor." Thorne stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He peered into the shadows of the porch. "I heard you bought a bride, a cripple from the gutter, but they say she bears a striking resemblance to our dear, departed Eleanor." Silas drew his gun. The movement was a blur. One more step, and you die. Thorne's bodyguards raised their shotguns. The ranch hands on the roof of the house cocked their rifles. The air crackled with tension. A single bird cry could have started a massacre. Thorne didn't flinch. He just smiled, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Bring her out, Silas. Let me see the little dolly." "She's not here," Silas lied. "Oh, but I think she is." Thorne reached into his pocket. Silas tensed, his finger tightening on the trigger. But Thorne only pulled out a pocket watch. "You see, Silas, I didn't just come to chat. I came to make an offer. Surrender the ranch by sundown tomorrow. If you do, I'll let you live. I'll even let you keep the girl. And if I don't, then I will burn this house to the ground with you inside it," Thorne said pleasantly, "just like last time. Only this time, I'll make sure the girl screams loud enough for you to hear her die." Clara couldn't help it. A gasp escaped her lips. Thorne's head snapped toward the doorway. He saw her. For a moment, the smirk vanished from Thorne's face, replaced by a look of genuine shock. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a ghost. "Eleanor?" Thorne whispered. Then a slow, cruel realization dawned on him. He laughed. A high, wheezing sound. "Oh, this is rich. This is delicious. You didn't just find a look-alike, Silas. You found the stray." Silas froze. "What are you talking about?" Thorne grinned, adjusting his cuffs. "Eleanor didn't just have a sister, Silas. Did she never tell you?" "No. I suppose she was ashamed. Her sister ran off with an Irishman. Had a child. A little red-headed bastard." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "My mother," she thought. My mother was Eleanor's sister. That meant Silas wasn't just a stranger. He was her uncle by marriage, and the woman in the painting was her aunt. "You see," Thorne continued, "I've been tracking the O'Malley girl for years. I knew she was the only heir who could contest the deed if you died, Silas. I arranged for her uncle to lose his farm. I arranged for him to bring her to that auction. I wanted you to buy her." Silas looked at Thorne, then back at the shadow where Clara stood. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had been played. "Why?" Silas asked. "Because," Thorne said, stepping back into his carriage. Killing you is easy, Silas. But breaking you? That takes art. I wanted you to fall in love with her face, and then I wanted you to realize that I own her. She's the bait, Silas, and you just swallowed the hook. Thorne slammed the carriage door. Sundown tomorrow, Blackwood, or we light the match. The carriage rattled away, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence so heavy it felt like a tomb. Silas turned to Clara. He looked devastated. You're her niece, he whispered. Your family. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She didn't feel fear anymore. She felt a cold, burning rage that matched the fire in Silas's eyes. I'm not bait, Silas, she said, her hand brushing the hidden pistol in her pocket. And I'm not a victim. If he wants a war, let's give him one. Sundown the next day brought a blood-red sky. The Ironwood Ranch was barricaded. Windows were boarded up with thick oak planks, leaving only narrow firing slits. Mattresses were piled against the doors. Buckets of water were placed in every room to fight fires. There were 12 men defending the ranch: Silas, Pike, Clara, and 9 loyal ranch hands. Against them, massing on the ridgeline, were 50 mercenaries hired by the Thorne Mining Consortium. They had Winchesters, dynamite, and a Gatling gun mounted on a wagon. They'll hit the gate first, Pike said, chewing on an unlit cigar. He was positioned on the roof with a long-range Sharps buffalo rifle. Silas stood in the main hall, checking the load in his shotgun. He looked at Clara. She was wearing a pair of trousers she had cut down to fit, a bandolier of ammunition across her chest, and her red hair tied back in a tight braid. She looked like a Valkyrie. You should be in the cellar, Silas said gruffly. The cellar has no windows, Clara replied, checking the cylinder of her Colt. I can't shoot from the cellar. Silas almost smiled. You are exactly like her, stubborn as a mule. Silas, she said, her voice softening. If we don't make it, we will. He cut her off, but his eyes said otherwise. Boom! The first stick of dynamite hit the front gate. The explosion shattered the evening calm. Wood splintered, and the gate flew off its hinges. Here they come! Pike yelled from the roof. The gunfire started instantly. It sounded like popcorn popping in a skillet, intensifying into a deafening roar. Bullets shredded the wood of the porch. Glass shattered. Hold your fire, Silas bellowed. Wait until they cross the creek. The mercenaries, sensing an easy victory, surged forward on horseback, whooping and hollering. Now! The ironwood hands opened up. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkening yard. Horses screamed and reared. Men fell from their saddles. The first wave broke and scrambled for cover behind the water troughs in the barn. They're setting up the Gatling gun, Pike shouted. A heavy thump, 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 thump began to tear through the front of the house. Bullets punched through the walls like they were paper. The grandfather clock in the hall exploded in a shower of gears and wood. Get down! Silas tackled Clara, covering her body with his own, as bullets chewed up the floorboards where she had just been standing. We can't hold them off against that gun. Clara yelled over the noise. I know, Silas grunted. I have to flank them. I have to get to the barn. It's suicide. It's the only way. Silas scrambled up. Cover me. He kicked open the back door and sprinted into the night. Clara crawled to the window. She saw Silas weaving through the shadows, heading toward the barn where the Gatling gun wagon was positioned. But the mercenaries saw him too. There he is. Get Blackwood. Concentrated fire kicked up dirt around Silas's feet. He dove behind a water barrel, pinned down. He was trapped. 3 men were advancing on his position, shotguns raised. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. He was going to die. He was going to die just like he died inside 10 years ago, watching the people he loved get hurt. No. Clara looked at the window. It was small, high up. A normal person would climb out, but with her bad leg, she couldn't climb. She looked at the front door. It was blocked by the barricade. She looked at the second floor. She scrambled up the stairs, ignoring the pain in her twisted leg. She burst into the master bedroom, the room directly above the porch. She threw open the window. Below her, the Gatling gun was hammering away at the house. To the left, the three men were closing in on Silas. Clara climbed onto the window ledge. The drop was 15 feet. "Hey!" she screamed. The three men turned their heads. Clara didn't shoot. She jumped. She didn't land on her feet. She knew she couldn't. She landed on the canvas roof of the mercenaries' supply wagon parked just below the porch. The canvas ripped, breaking her fall, and she tumbled into the back of the wagon, surrounded by crates of ammunition. She rolled out, gasping for air, adrenaline masking the agony in her bad leg. She was now behind the enemy line. The three men who had Silas pinned turned toward the noise of the wagon. Clara rested her Colt on the wheel of the wagon. She took a breath. She remembered Pike's voice. Squeeze. Don't pull. Bang. The first man dropped. Bang. The second man spun around, clutching his shoulder. The third man leveled his rifle at her. Bang. A shot rang out, but not from Clara's gun. The third man fell, a hole in his chest. Silas stood up from behind the barrel, his gun smoking. He looked at Clara, his eyes wide with disbelief. She had just jumped off a roof to save him. "Crazy woman!" he roared, running toward her. "Look out!" Clara pointed. The Gatling gunner had swiveled the massive weapon around, aiming it directly at Silas and Clara. There was nowhere to run. Silas dove for Clara, shielding her again, waiting for the shredding impact of 50 caliber bullets. Click. Whir. Click. The gun jammed. In the chaos of the rapid fire, the mechanism had overheated. Silas didn't hesitate. He raised his shotgun and fired both barrels at the dynamite crates stacked next to the gun wagon. The explosion was earth-shattering. A fireball engulfed the wagon, the gun, and the mercenaries manning it. The shock wave knocked Silas and Clara flat into the mud. Silence fell over the ranch. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their heavy weapon destroyed and their paymasters gone, broke and ran. They were hired guns, not martyrs. They fled into the darkness, leaving only the crackle of burning wood and the smell of sulfur. Silas coughed, pushing himself up on his elbows. He was covered in soot, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He looked frantically for Clara. She was lying in the mud a few feet away, clutching her bad leg, her face white as a sheet. "Clara!" He scrambled over to her. "Are you hit?" "My leg," she grit out. "I think I broke it again." Silas let out a laugh, a ragged, hysterical, joyful sound. He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "You are the wildest thing I have ever seen," he whispered into her hair. "You jumped off a roof." "I told you," Clara whispered, resting her head against his chest, listening to the thundering of his heart. "I'm not bait." Silas carried her toward the house, past the burning wreckage. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. Cornelius Thorne hadn't been at the battle. He was still out there. And now, Silas Blackwood had something to lose again. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Dawn broke over Ironwood in streaks of bloody orange. The siege was over, but the war was not. Inside the master bedroom, Clara O'Malley lay propped against the headboard, her legs splinted with cedar shingles. The pain was a dull roar, but her mind was racing. Beside her sat Silas Blackwood. The devil of Montana looked human for the first time in years. Exhausted, soot-stained, and holding her hand as if it were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away. "Thorn isn't done," Silas rasped, his voice gravelly from the smoke. "He lost his mercenaries, but he still has the law. He'll be back with judges and writs. He'll steal with a pen what he couldn't take with a gun." Clara's eyes widened as a sharp memory pierced through her pain. "My dress," she whispered urgently. Silas frowned. "The gray one? Clara, it's ruined. I threw it in the burn pile." "Get it back," she cried, gripping his hand. "My uncle told me never to lose it. He said there was something sewn into the lining. My mother's legacy. I forgot about it until now." Silas didn't ask questions. He bolted from the room and returned minutes later with a scorched, wet bundle of wool. He laid it on the bed, and Clara ripped open the stiff bodice seam. Hidden inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a folded parchment sealed with red wax. Silas broke the seal. His hand, steady during the gunfight, trembled as he read the document. He looked up at Clara, his face pale. "My God," he whispered. "It's the deed. The original deed to Ironwood." "But Thorn has the deed," Clara said. "That's why he killed Eleanor." "Thorn has a forgery," Silas realized, a cold smile forming on his scarred face. "Eleanor must have known he was coming. She sent the real deed away with her sister, your mother. Look at the date." He pointed to the bottom of the page. April 14th, 1864. "The courthouse in Bannock burned down on May 1st, Silas said. "Any deed Thorn has would be dated after the fire, claimed on lost records. This proves he's been lying for 10 years. A booming voice from the yard shattered the moment. "Silas Blackwood." It was Cornelius Thorn, amplified by a megaphone. "By order of the territorial court, I am here to claim my property." Silas walked to the window. Thorn sat in a pristine carriage, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals and a team of lawyers. He had traded his hired guns for badges. "You have 1 hour to vacate," Thorn shouted, "or the Marshals will burn you out." Silas turned to Clara. He held up the yellowed parchment, his single blue eye blazing with a terrifying intensity. "Can you walk, Mrs. Blackwood?" Clara gritted her teeth. "If you help me." "Then get dressed," Silas said. "It's time we ended this." 20 minutes later, the front doors of Ironwood swung open. Silas stepped onto the ruined porch, wearing his fine black suit and eye patch. Leaning heavily on his arm was Clara. She wore a deep green silk dressing gown that had belonged to the late Eleanor, her red hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked like a queen returning from exile. Thorn sneered from his carriage. "I see you're leaving peacefully. Wise choice." "We aren't leaving," Silas said calmly. "And neither are you, Cornelius, not until you answer to Marshal Davis." The marshal rode forward, hand on his gun. "Mr. Blackwood, I have a court order. This land belongs to the Thorn Consortium." "Based on a deed signed by a corrupt judge," Silas countered. "The deed is legal," Thorn shrieked. "I bought this land 10 years ago." "No." Clara's voice cut through the air. She stepped away from Silas, balancing precariously on her cane. "You murdered my aunt for this land, but you never bought it." Thorn's eyes bulged. "Who is this cripple? Silas, have you lost your mind?" Clara reached up and pulled the collar of her gown down, revealing the star-shaped birthmark on her collarbone. Thorn gasped. He had seen that mark before, on the woman he killed. "My name is Clara O'Malley," she declared, daughter of Sarah Vance, niece to Eleanor Vance. She pulled the parchment from her pocket and held it high. And this is the original territorial deed, entrusted to my mother before Eleanor died. It predates your claim by 2 weeks, Mr. Thorne, and it proves that the document you filed is a fraud. Marshal Davis squinted at the paper. He saw the wax seal. He saw the date. He looked at Thorne, whose face had turned the color of ash. Mr. Thorne, the marshal said slowly, your filing claims the original records were lost in the fire, but this document clearly survived. It's a fake, Thorne stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. She's a witch, a lying witch. The only liar here is you, Silas growled, stepping forward. You killed Eleanor for a piece of paper that was worthless. You spent a decade haunting this valley, but the truth was, hiding in a pauper's dress the whole time. Silas looked at the marshal. Arrest him. For fraud, for forgery, and for the murder of my wife. Thorne didn't wait. He screamed at his driver, Go! Go! The carriage lurched forward, but the marshals were faster. They cut him off, guns drawn. Thorne was dragged from the velvet seat, kicking and screaming, his empire of lies crumbling in the dirt of the ranch he tried to steal. As they hauled him away, silence returned to the valley. Clara swayed, her strength finally failing her. Silas caught her before she hit the floor, scooping her up into his arms. You realize, Silas murmured, looking down at her, that since your aunt left no will, this ranch legally belongs to you now. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Well then, Mr. Blackwood, she smiled weakly. I suppose I'll need a foreman. Do you know anyone looking for a job? Silas Blackwood, the man who had frozen in terror when he first saw her face, finally smiled. It wasn't a grimace of pain, but a smile of pure relief. I might, he said softly, carrying his wife back inside, but he comes with a lot of baggage. That's all right, Clara whispered. We have plenty of room. 6 months later. Spring, 1875. The Gilded Spur Saloon in Miller's Crossing was just as filthy as ever. The piano player hammered out a tune, trying to drown out the noise of the miners. Suddenly, the room went silent. Silas Blackwood walked in. He still wore the long duster and the eye patch, but the darkness that used to cling to him was gone. He walked with the easy stride of a man who had nothing left to fear. He approached a table in the back corner where Tobias O'Malley sat, hunched over a cheap beer. Tobias looked up, his eyes widening in terror. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't know you were in town. Is Clara? Clara is the mistress of Ironwood, Silas said, his voice ringing through the quiet room. And she is happy. Tobias stammered, I'm glad to hear it. I always knew she was a special girl. Silas didn't smile. He reached into his coat and dropped a heavy leather pouch onto the table. It hit the wood with a solid thud of gold. $5,000, Silas said. The patrons gasped. Tobias stared at the bag greedily. What is this for? Silas leaned in, his single eye locking onto Tobias. This is the final payment. For the bride you didn't want. You sold a diamond for the price of coal, Tobias. Now, take the money. Tobias reached for the bag, his hands shaking. But there is a condition, Silas added, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You will take this money. You will leave the Montana Territory, and you will never let Clara see your face again. If you return, the next payment will be in lead. Tobias nodded frantically, clutching the gold. He scrambled out the back door, disappearing into the oblivion he deserved. Silas turned and walked out into the bright spring sunshine. Waiting for him on a buckboard wagon was Clara. She wore a dress of emerald green, and though she held a cane, she sat tall. Her leg had healed, but the steel in her spine was stronger than ever. Silas mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwood?" Clara smiled, a radiant look that outshone the sun. "Let's ride, Silas." They turned towards the mountains, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them, riding together into a future they had built from the ashes. And that is the legend of Silas and Clara Blackwood. He bought a wife to hide from his past, but instead he found the only woman brave enough to save him from it. Their story remains a favorite tale of the Wild West, a reminder that sometimes the things society throws away are the only things worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this saga of romance, revenge, and redemption, please smash that like button. It helps us bring more of these lost legends to life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Silas should have forgiven the uncle? Or did Tobias get off too easy with that gold? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next trail.